Let me tell you something that happened to me 3 years ago, something I have never fully told anyone, not my closest friends, not my family, not even the one person who was standing right next to me when it all unfolded. I have rehearsed this confession in my head 1,000 times, lying awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, wondering what people would think if they knew the truth. And every time I got close to saying it out loud, something stopped me. Fear, maybe. Or maybe something deeper than fear, something more like shame mixed with wonder, a cocktail of emotions I still do not have a proper name for. But today I am going to tell it. All of it. From the very beginning, because if you jump into the middle of this story, you will not understand what it meant, and what it meant is everything. My name is Ryan. I am 26 years old now, which means I was 23 when this happened. I grew up in a large, loud, beautifully chaotic Pakistani family where weddings were not just celebrations, they were productions. Grand, weeks-long, emotionally exhausting, logistically impossible productions that somehow always came together at the last second because someone in the family was always willing to step up and save the day. I had seen my aunts transform spare bedrooms into makeup studios at midnight. I had seen my uncles drive 4 hours to pick up a forgotten Saudi outfit. I had seen my grandmother sew a dupatta back together by hand in a moving car. Weddings in my family were survival exercises dressed up in sequins and gold thread. So when my cousin Zara's wedding fell into complete and total chaos 3 days before the ceremony, nobody in the family was entirely surprised. Surprised by the scale of the disaster, yes, but not by the existence of it. Here is what happened. Zara had been planning her wedding for 14 months. 14 months of spreadsheets, Pinterest boards, vendor negotiations, family arguments, late-night calls with her fiancé Hamza, and color-coded binders that she carried everywhere like sacred texts. She was the most organized person I had ever met, and she was going to have the most perfect wedding anyone in our family had ever witnessed. That was the plan. That was always the plan. And then, 3 days before the nikah, her maid of honor, her best friend since childhood, her person, got on a plane to Dubai for a family emergency and could not come back in time. Her backup bridesmaid got food poisoning so severe she ended up in the hospital. And her wedding coordinator, the professional one she had paid a considerable sum of money to, quietly had a personal breakdown and stopped answering her phone entirely. I heard about all of this secondhand, through the relay system that is my extended family's WhatsApp groups, and I felt genuinely terrible for Zara. She was not just a cousin to me, she was more like an older sister. She had been the one who sat with me during the worst year of my life when I was 19 and going through something I still find difficult to talk about. She had not asked questions. She had just been there. Steady and warm and present. I owed her more than I could ever repay. So when her mother, my Carla Nazreen, called me directly and said the words, "Ryan, we need you," I did not hesitate. I said yes before she even finished the sentence. What I did not fully understand, what I perhaps should have asked about before saying yes so enthusiastically, was exactly what "we need you" meant in this specific context. Carla Nazreen explained it to me in pieces, the way you feed medicine to a stubborn child, one small dose at a time so they do not realize what is happening until it is already inside them. She said that since both Zara's maid of honor and her backup were unavailable, and since the Mehendi ceremony was in less than 48 hours, they needed someone to fill in. To stand beside Zara. To be present in the photographs. To help manage the day. I said that sounded fine. I said I could do that. Then she said, very carefully, that the Mehendi ceremony had a particular theme. A very specific, very coordinated aesthetic that Zara had planned for over a year. All of the women in the bridal party were wearing matching outfits. Custom-made lehengas in deep rose and antique gold, with specific jewelry sets and specific hairstyles and specific makeup looks that had been planned and organized and paid for in advance. I said, still not understanding where this was going, that I could wear something coordinating. That I could find something. And then Carla Nazreen said, very quietly, "Beta, the outfits are already made. The jewelry is already here. There is no time to make something new. The photographer is already briefed on the bridal party composition. And Zara's maid of honor was the same size as you." There was a silence on the phone that felt about 3 years long. I said, "Carla, what exactly are you asking me?" She said, I'm asking you to be there for Zara. In whatever way she needs. The way she was there for you. And that was it. That was the thing that broke through every wall I might have otherwise built. Because she was right. Zara had been there for me in whatever way I needed, without condition, without judgment, without making me feel like a burden. And now, in the most important week of her life, she needed me. I said yes. Again. This time knowing what I was saying yes to. I want to pause here and be honest about something, because this story is about honesty, and if I'm going to tell it, I'm going to tell it properly. The yes I said that second time was not entirely motivated by selflessness. There was something else in it. Something I had carried for a long time in a locked room at the back of my mind. Something I had never quite had permission to look at directly. A curiosity, maybe. An awareness that had always lived quietly inside me, that I had always kept very still and very hidden, about identity and expression and what it might feel like to exist in the world in a different way, even briefly, even just once. I am not saying I engineered this situation. I did not. But I am saying that when the situation presented itself, the part of me that said yes was not only the part that loved Zara. There was another part. A smaller, quieter, braver part. And it said yes too. The next 48 hours were among the most surreal of my life. Carla Nazreen drove me to their house that evening, and Zara herself met me at the door. She looked tired and overwhelmed, and when she saw me she just grabbed my arm and held it for a moment without saying anything. Then she looked at me with this expression I will never forget, something between relief and apology and deep, complicated gratitude, and she said, "You don't have to do this." I said, "I know." She said, "It's a lot to ask." I said, "I know that too." She said, "Are you sure?" And I looked at her, this woman who had sat with me at my lowest point and never made me feel small, and I said, "Zara, let me be there for you. That is all I want." She hugged me then, properly, the kind of hug that says more than words can, and then she pulled back and looked at me with a slightly mischievous expression through her tired eyes and said, "Okay. But I need you to know up front that Amy has already called the makeup artist." The makeup artist arrived the following morning. Her name was Sana, and she was one of those people who radiate complete professional calm in all circumstances. The kind of person who could style someone for a wedding in the middle of a tornado and never drop a single pin. She walked in, assessed the situation, looked at me with zero judgment whatsoever, and said, "Okay, so we are working with a blank canvas. That is actually easier." I will not pretend I was not nervous. I was nervous in a way that went beyond ordinary social anxiety. This was something different. This was the feeling of standing at the edge of something you have always been curious about and realizing you are actually about to step off the edge and not knowing if it is going to feel like falling or flying. The getting ready process took most of the morning. Sana started with skincare, then foundation, then contouring, and she taught me through everything she was doing, not in a patronizing way but in a genuinely informative way, as if she understood that this was new territory for me and wanted me to feel like a participant rather than a subject. Zara sat nearby doing her own preparations, and occasionally she would look over and catch my eye and smile, and those small moments of connection made the whole thing feel safe. When Sana finished the base makeup and moved on to the eyes, something started to shift. I could feel it before I could see it. A kind of quiet settling into something, the way water finds its level. My shoulders relaxed. My breathing slowed. I stopped gripping the arm of the chair quite so tightly. Then she held up the mirror. I do not have the right words for what happened in that moment. I have tried to find them many times since. The person looking back at me was me, unmistakably, and yet something in the composition was different. The kohl-lined eyes, the contoured cheekbones, the carefully shaped brows, all of it added up to something I had never seen in my own reflection before, and what I felt looking at it was not shock or horror or the confused embarrassment I had braced myself for. What I felt was something that I can only describe as recognition. Like meeting someone you have always known but never had the right context to understand. I blinked. The person in the mirror blinked. We looked at each other for a long moment. Sana, reading the room with her extraordinary professional sensitivity, said simply, "You have really good bone structure. Most people have to work harder for cheekbones like that." I laughed, and it came out shaky, and I said, "Thank you," and she moved on to the next step as if nothing seismic had just happened, which was exactly the right thing to do. The lehenga was rose and gold, heavily embroidered, with a matching dupatta that Sana draped in the traditional bridal style. The jewelry was gold with ruby accents, a full set including a Martha patty that sat across my forehead. When I was fully dressed, Zara came and stood beside me in front of the full-length mirror, and we both looked at our reflections, and she put her arm around my shoulders and said quietly, "You look beautiful." I did not know how to receive that. I did not know how to hold it or where to put it. So I just said, "We match." She laughed and said, "We do." The mehendi ceremony was held in the family garden, which had been transformed overnight into something out of a dream, fairy lights strung through the trees, marigold garlands draped across every surface, the warm evening air carrying the smell of flowers and the sound of dole in the distance. There were perhaps 150 guests, most of them family, many of whom I had known my whole life. I am not going to pretend the anxiety was not immense. Walking out into that garden in that outfit, with that makeup and those jewels, surrounded by people who had known me since I was a child, was one of the most terrifying things I have ever done. My heart was hammering so loudly I was certain everyone around me could hear it. My hands, holding the edge of my dupatta, were not entirely steady. And then something happened that I still think about all the time. My Nana Abu, my grandfather, the most traditional man in our entire family, a man who had strong opinions about virtually everything and was not shy about expressing them, walked across the garden toward me. He was 81 years old and walked with a cane and had eyes that had seen everything. I watched him coming and I felt the anxiety spike into something very close to panic. Of all the people in that garden, he was the one I had most feared encountering. He reached me and stopped, and looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and I held absolutely still, waiting. He said, "You are very good to do this for Zara." That was all. No commentary. No awkwardness. Just that simple, direct acknowledgement of the thing I was doing and why I was doing it. I said, "She would do it for me." He nodded, once, and said, "Yes, she would." And then he moved on. I stood there for a moment afterward feeling something break open in my chest, something that had been sealed for a very long time. It was not a bad feeling. It was the feeling of a door opening. The ceremony itself was extraordinary. Zara was glowing, genuinely luminously happy, the kind of happiness that radiates outward and makes everyone around it warmer. Hamza arrived with his side of the family, and the moment he saw her across the garden his face did this thing that I think every person hopes to see on the face of someone who loves them, this complete and unguarded softness. I stood beside Zara through the mehendi application, holding her dupatta, passing items to her as needed, doing all the small logistical things a maid of honor does, and somewhere in the middle of all of it the nervousness stopped being the dominant feeling and something else took over. It was presence. Just being fully, entirely present in a moment that mattered. There were photographs taken throughout the evening. I appear in many of them, standing beside Zara, laughing at something, holding her hand, helping adjust her jewelry. I have seen those photographs since. I have looked at myself in them for longer than I have looked at almost any image of myself in my life. Not out of vanity, though I will admit the makeup and styling were exceptionally well done, but because of what I can see in that face. There is something relaxed there, something open. Something that is not usually visible in photographs of me. The wedding happened 2 days later. I attended as myself, in a regular shalwar kameez, as a cousin and a guest. Nobody said anything unusual to me. The night before, while Zara and I were sitting together going through the final details, she had asked me, very gently, how I was feeling about everything. Not about the logistics. About the experience. I had thought about it for a while before answering. And then I had said, honestly, I feel like something shifted. I do not know entirely what to do with it yet. But I feel like something that was stuck got unstuck. She had looked at me with that steady warmth that was so characteristic of her and said, "Good. That is good." I said, "Is it?" She said, "Anything that unsticks something stuck in you is good. Full stop. No qualifications." I had sat with that for a while in silence. Then I said, I think I have always known some things about myself that I have not been ready to look at directly. She did not push. She just said, "You do not have to be ready all at once. You can know things slowly. You can take as long as you need." That conversation, quiet and undramatic as it was, sitting on her bedroom floor surrounded by wedding preparation chaos, was one of the most important conversations I have ever had. Because what she was giving me was permission. Not permission to be any particular thing or to label myself in any particular way, but permission to be curious. Permission to not have it all figured out. Permission to hold an open question without immediately forcing it into an answer. In the months after the wedding, I did a lot of thinking. Quiet, private thinking of the kind that does not make noise but moves things around inside you. I thought about the moment in front of the mirror when I had felt recognition. I thought about the way my shoulders had relaxed during the getting ready process. I thought about standing in that garden in the rose and gold lehenga and feeling, beneath all the anxiety, something that was very much like rightness. Like a frequency I had been missing that I suddenly had access to. I am not going to tell you I had all the answers in the months after the wedding, because I did not. I still do not have all of them now. Identity is not a puzzle you solve once and then put in a frame on the wall. It is a living, breathing, ongoing conversation between who you have been, who you are, and who you are still becoming. What I can tell you is that the conversation got louder after that night. And louder was better. Louder meant I was finally listening. I started paying more attention to things I had previously dismissed or pushed aside. The way I felt in certain contexts. The things that made me feel most like myself versus least like myself. The assumptions I had absorbed from the world around me about what I was supposed to want and be and express. I started asking, very quietly and very privately, whether those assumptions were actually mine or whether I had simply inherited them and never examined the inheritance. This is the part that surprises people when I tell it, the part that does not fit neatly into the kind of story where everything is resolved in a single dramatic moment. The Mehendi night was not the moment where I figured everything out. It was the moment where I finally admitted to myself that there was something to figure out. That is actually the more important event. Because you cannot navigate toward something if you refuse to acknowledge it exists. I talked to Zara about some of this, in pieces, over the following year. She was, as she had always been, exactly the right person to talk to. She did not project onto me or try to define my experience for me. She just listened and asked good questions and occasionally offered the kind of quiet insight that only comes from genuine attention. Once, when I was struggling to articulate something about the way I had felt that night, she said, "Maybe the outfit was not the thing that changed how you felt. Maybe it just removed something that was in the way." I have thought about that many times since. I think she was right. The clothes and the makeup and the jewelry were not the transformation. They were the conditions under which I let myself see something that had been there all along. The real transformation was internal, and it had been building for years, quietly, without my conscious participation, and all it needed was a single unusual night and a cousin who loved me unconditionally and a patient makeup artist and a garden full of fairy lights and marigolds. There is something I want to say to anyone who might be in the position I was in, carrying something you do not quite have words for, something you have kept very still and very hidden because you are not sure what happens if you look at it directly. I want to say this gently and without drama, because it does not need drama. It just needs to be said. The looking does not hurt as much as you think it will. I spent years being more afraid of the looking than I needed to be. I built elaborate walls around a room that turned out, when I finally opened the door, to contain something much less frightening than I had imagined. What was inside was just me. A version of me I had not met properly yet. A version that had been patient and quiet and waiting, without anger or urgency, just waiting for the moment when I was ready. I am still not done becoming whoever I am becoming. I do not think any of us are ever done. But I am less afraid of the process now. I am more curious than afraid. And that is a shift I would not trade for anything. Zara's wedding photographs are framed in her home now. In one of them, the one I love most, she and I are standing in that garden with our heads tilted together, both of us laughing at something that was said just before the shutter clicked. We are both wearing rose and gold. We both look completely and entirely like ourselves. That is the ending of this story. Not a dramatic reveal, not a final transformation, not a neat resolution with all the loose ends tied up. Just two people in a garden, laughing, both of them exactly where they are supposed to be, and one of them carrying a secret that turned out to be less of a secret and more of a beginning. My name is Ryan. I am 26 years old. 3 years ago I became the bride at my cousin's mehendi ceremony because 2 bridesmaids were unavailable and the outfits were already made and someone had to step up, and I said yes before I fully understood what I was saying yes to. And that yes, that impulsive, imperfect, love-motivated yes, turned out to be one of the most important things I have ever done. Not because of what I wore. Not because of how I looked. But because of what I finally let myself see. If you are carrying something like this, something you have kept still and hidden, I just want you to know that the room is safe. The door is not locked from the outside. It was never locked from the outside. You have always had the key. And whenever you are ready, whenever the conditions are right, even if those conditions are as unexpected and improbable as a cousin's wedding emergency and a makeup artist with steady hands and a garden full of marigolds, the door will open. And what you find inside will be worth the wait.